10 Kids, No Pets by Anne M. Martin. Copyright 1988. Chapter 9. Faustine. One Saturday in April, the temperature rose to 65 degrees. "It's spring!" cried Faustine. "All of a sudden, spring is here." "And it's the weekend," added Dini. "Rimbaud tango, extra specially good." It certainly did seem like spring. On the Rossos farm, Faustine could smell spring, see spring, hear spring, and feel spring. It was everywhere. It was in the tinge of green on the trees and bushes, the blush of pink on the dogwoods and magnolias, the fuzz of yellow on the forsythia. It was in the Rossos' very own brook, which rushed along noisily, still swollen with runoff from the winter's snow. It was in the newly warm air, which smelled of grass and leaves and other green, living things. It was in the robins and sparrows and wrens and cardinals and chickadees, which had become very busy building nests and raising families. Faustine especially liked the birds. She didn't remember birds in New York except for sparrows and pigeons. The pigeons had been brash and pushy and uppity. They'd fought over all kinds of things that birds had no business eating in the first place, such as pizza and the ends of hot dogs. But on the New Jersey farm, there wasn't a single pigeon to be seen. In March, Faustine had announced, "I saw a robin today." "Must have been the first robin, bringing spring," her father had told her. "What?" "The first robin that you see brings spring. Watch now. Spring won't be far off," Mr. Rossos said. Then he'd returned to a carpentry magazine. He'd been right. Very slowly, spring had crept up on the farm. It had settled over it like a fresh, warm blanket, and on that day in April, a month later, Faustine was sure it was through arriving. 65 degrees is almost summer," she said. She and Dini had run outside barefoot with their sweatshirts tied around their waists. They planned to go wading in the brook, but Mrs. Rosso called them back. "Shoes," she said, pointing to their feet. "Mom, it's 65 degrees today," Faustine pointed out. "It's the middle of April," Mrs. Rosso countered. "It's not that warm, and the brook will be freezing even if the air isn't. Put on socks and shoes and your sweatshirts, and no wading." The twins had obeyed unhappily. "Muchi Salaman," they had grumbled. But the day was too nice to let socks and shoes and sweatshirts get in the way, and there were plenty of other things to do besides wading in the brook, which was freezing. They walked through the woods, and after a while they were glad they were wearing their sweatshirts. Dini had brought a book about wildflowers with her, and Faustine had brought a book about birds. In their pockets were pads of paper and pencils. Faustine's pad was labeled birds. Dini's was labeled flowers. They planned to make lists of the birds and flowers they saw. "Hey, what's this?" asked Dini, pausing by some purple blooms clustered at the roots of a sycamore tree. "Bluebells?" Faustine suggested. Dini shook her head. "Bluebells were last month." She opened her book. "Oh, they're violets," she exclaimed. She wrote violets on her list. As the morning wore on, they added lilies, grape hyacinths, and jonquils to Dini's list. Faustine's list was longer. The twins spotted all sorts of birds, a mud-colored female cardinal, another robin, several sparrows, a blackbird, a crow, and even a hawk soaring overhead. Once Faustine thought she saw a hummingbird, but it turned out to be a large flying insect, which was disappointing. Nevertheless, they sat down under an oak tree to examine the insect. When it had flown away, Dini said, "We should have brought lunches with us. We could have eaten them right here, just as if we were real nature explorers." She was answered by a harsh squawk and looked at her twin suspiciously. "That wasn't me," said Faustine. "It came from around the tree." "From around the tree?" Dini's eyes met Faustine's nervously. Faustine stretched out her fingers until they touched Dini's. The twins clasped hands desperately. "What do you suppose is back there?" Dini whispered. "A snark blanket?" "Don't be silly," replied Dini. "We made up snark blankets." But she didn't look very convinced. "Squawk!" The cry came again. "Ee!" shrieked Faustine. She and Dini clutched hands more tightly and leaped to their feet. "Squawk! Squawk! Squawk!" "Whatever it is, it sounds kind of scared," Faustine whispered. "Well, we'll just have to peek around the tree," said Dini. The twins peered around one side of the tree. They leaned over farther and farther. "I don't see anything," said Dini. "Look down," Faustine told her. Dini looked at the base of the tree, and her eyes discovered what Faustine had already found. It was a grackle, a large blackbird with iridescent feathers and a long tail. It sounded very unhappy. Faustine knelt beside the grackle. "Aw, it's hurt," she cried softly. "Dini, its wing is hurt." The twins crouched beside the bird. It stared at them with beady eyes. When Faustine stroked one of its wings, it let out another squawk and struggled awkwardly away, one wing flapping, the other barely moving. "I think its wing is broken," Faustine exclaimed. "We better take it home with us," said Deanie. "Oh," said Faustine, "Mom will never let us keep a bird." "Yes, she will. She'll let us have an injured one. We have to make it well. She can't say no to a bird with a broken wing. That would be cruel." "She can too say no," replied Faustine, but she knew that she could never leave the bird lying in the woods. She and Deanie would have to try to convince their mother that it was all right to keep the bird, at least until it was well. Deanie was looking at Faustine expectantly. "Okay," said Faustine, "let's go. But how are we going to get it home?" "In my sweatshirt," Deanie said immediately. She peeled off her sweatshirt and wrapped it around the bird. The grackle squawked. Goosebumps rose on Deanie's arms because the woods were shady and cool, but the twins marched resolutely back to the farm. "I'll talk to Mom," Faustine said on the way. "She still mentions Goliath, and Goliath was your, mistake, so she's not going to be too happy if you bring her another bird." "Okay," agreed Deanie, her face reddening. Under her breath, she muttered, "Muchi Solomon." When the twins returned to the farmyard, Deanie handed Faustine the bird. They hadn't even reached the house when Mrs. Rossos called from the back door, "Gardenia, where's your sweatshirt?" "It's right here," Faustine replied for Deanie, pointing. "Mom, we found a bird with a broken wing." Mrs. Rossos stepped outside and peered into the depths of Deanie's sweatshirt. "Oh, girls," she groaned. "We know how you feel about pets," said Faustine, "but all we want to do is make the bird well." "What's that?" asked Bainbridge, striding out the back door. Deanie showed him. "Can you help us set the wing?" she asked. Bainbridge looked at his mother with raised eyebrows. Mrs. Rossos sighed. "Oh, go ahead," she said, waving the bird away. She marched back into the house. The twins giggled. "Grood!" exclaimed Deanie. "Bainbridge, do you know how to set the wing?" asked Faustine. Sure," he replied. "I've seen it done on TV. We'll make a splint for it out of popsicle sticks, and then bind the wing to the body. We'll let him or her use the other wing. I wonder if this is a girl or a boy." A half hour later, the bird was settled into the corner of a carton that had once held cans of condensed milk. Its wing was set and bandaged. It had squawked horribly during the procedure, but now was quiet. Bainbridge looked very proud of himself. "Maybe I'll become a vet," he said importantly. Faustine managed to persuade her mother to let the bird stay in the twins' room. "See how quiet it is now? It won't be any trouble." She and Deanie lined the box with rags and put a dish of water and some leaves and grass and birdseed and even an insect in the box. They weren't sure what grackles ate, but they thought the birdseed should do for a few days. All birds ate birdseed, didn't they? Then they decided to name the bird. "Let's pick the plainest, nicest name we know," said Faustine, rocking back on her heels and looking at her sister. "Girl's name or boy's name?" asked Deanie. "Girls. I think it's a girl, don't you?" Deanie nodded. "How about Patricia?" "That's not plain." "How about Cynthia?" "That's not plain either." The twins considered Jennifer, Sarah, Emily, and Mandy, and finally decided on Sally. "Plainest of the plain," said Faustine. By bedtime that night, all of the Rosso kids had spent time in the twins' room, leaning over the box and cooing at Sally, or talking to her, or trying to stroke the top of her shiny head. "She's awful quiet," Hannah observed. "I think she's had too much excitement," said Faustine. "We should leave her alone for a while." "Right," said Deanie. "She hasn't eaten a thing. She hasn't even moved out of that corner." The twins were worried about Sally, but neither wanted to admit it. Instead, they asked Hannah to leave the room. Then Deanie hung a "No Visitor" sign on the bedroom door. "I think we should check on Sally all night," said Faustine as she and Deanie were putting on their pajamas. "Okay," agreed Deanie. "Let's see. It's 9:30 now. I'll check on her at midnight, you check on her at 3, and I'll check on her again at 6. That was the plan, and the twins stuck to it nicely at first. When the alarm went off at midnight, Faustine looked in on Sally, who appeared to be sleeping. She moved some of the birdseed closer to her. Sally stirred but didn't try to eat it. Faustine reset the alarm for 3. At 3 o'clock, Deanie sleepily peered in at Sally and offered her some water, but Sally wasn't interested. Deanie reset the alarm for 6. At 6 o'clock, Faustine turned off the alarm, but she didn't get out of bed. She just couldn't. She was much too tired. "I'll see you when we get up," she murmured to Sally from the coziness of her covers. "I hope you feel better then." But when the twins arose at 8:30, Sally was dead. She was lying stiffly on her side in the corner of the condensed milk box. "Oh no," cried Faustine. "This is all my fault. I should have checked on her at 6, but instead I went back to sleep. It's my fault for being lazy. Now we don't even have an injured pet." Deanie didn't say anything. She couldn't help thinking that her sister was right. But Mrs. Rosso had a different opinion. "I think Sally might have died no matter what. We don't know how she broke her wing. Maybe she had other injuries too. You girls did the very best you could." Faustine felt only a tiny bit better. It was Ira who suggested holding a funeral for Sally. "A funeral," repeated Faustine thoughtfully. Maybe she would feel better after a funeral. The other kids liked the idea, and they began to make plans. Sally's funeral began at 2 o'clock that afternoon. In preparation, Faustine had fixed up a shoebox and placed Sally in it, splint and all, and Bainbridge had dug a shoebox-sized hole in the ground near the oak tree behind the house. The Rossos gathered there, and Bainbridge placed the box in the hole while Woody played his harmonica. He had to play Home on the Range because that was the only song he knew. Then Faustine and Deanie delivered the eulogy. They each said some kind things about Sally. Their eulogy was very nice, except that it was constantly interrupted by loud cheeping from somewhere nearby. "Be quiet, you birds," Ira hissed. He wanted Sally's funeral to be perfect. The cheeping continued as Bainbridge buried the shoebox and Deanie placed a rock on the spot as a gravestone. "Birds! Shh!" Ira commanded. It continued while Faustine placed a bunch of violets next to the gravestone. Then the funeral was over. "What is all that noise?" exclaimed Abby. "Let's go see," said Jan. She was already heading for a nearby tree, a low one with lots of branches, and she began to climb up. "Are you sure the noise is coming from that tree?" asked Hannah. "Yep," replied Jan, and she was right. "Oh," she said softly a few moments later, "look what I found." "What?" cried the others from below. "Bird babies, a whole nest of them." "Well, come down right now," Faustine ordered. "If the mother comes back and smells a human, she won't go near her babies." "Really?" asked Jan, astonished. She climbed out of the tree as fast as she could, jumping the last few feet to the ground. The Rossos found a spot several yards away where they could see the nest, and they stood there for over an hour, waiting for the mother to return and feed them. But no bird even flew near to the tree. The cheeping became more insistent. Hardy ran inside and found a pair of binoculars and a pair of opera glasses. The watching continued, but no mother or father appeared. "Maybe Sally was their mother," Jan exclaimed. "Maybe," said Faustine, "but I don't think so. We found her awfully far away from here, and we've had her for an entire day now, 24 hours. I don't think the babies could go that long without food." By supper time, no big bird had arrived at the nest, and the cheeping was quieting down. "It sounds like the babies have given up," said Ira sadly. Even Mrs. Rosso seemed concerned about the baby birds. "I do think we ought to do something about them," she said while they were eating dinner. "I'd hate to see them die." A window was open in the dining room, and every now and then a feeble chirp could be heard. "Baby birds need to eat all the time," Deanie pointed out. The Rossos held a discussion, and Mr. Rosso was elected to phone Mr. Pritchard to find out which vet he used. Then Faustine was elected to phone the vet, Dr. Bernardi, and find out what to do for the birds. An hour later, the nest, babies and all, had been taken out of the tree and placed in a big box lined with rags. Abby, Candy, Deanie, and Faustine were each feeding one of the 4 baby birds with an eyedropper. The babies were going to need frequent feedings, and the Rossos had worked out a schedule that allowed 2 of them to be up with the babies every hour that night. Even Mrs. Rosso was going to help with the feedings, although she said more than once, "I thought I was finished with 2 o'clock feedings after Janthina outgrew them." The next morning, Faustine woke up groggily. She'd gotten up twice during the night to feed the birds. The second time, which had been at 5 a.m., the birds had eaten hungrily and chirped excitedly. Even so, Faustine couldn't help being afraid that she would now find the babies dead, as she had found Sally dead the day before. But when she tiptoed into the den, where the heat had been turned up for the birds' sake, she found her mother bent over the box with an eyedropper, and 4 eager beaks opening and closing. "Oh, they're all alive," whispered Faustine. "Very much so," replied Mrs. Rosso with a smile. Over the next few weeks, the birds grew rapidly. They were not, as it turned out, Sally's babies, since they were sparrows, not grackles. Much of the feeding of the birds fell to Mrs. Rosso, who was the only one at home during the school days, but Faustine and her brothers and sisters took over whenever they could. They were glad to see Mrs. Rosso pitching in, though. She actually seemed to like caring for the birds. "Maybe, when they're all grown up, we can keep them," Faustine said hopefully to Deanie one day. Or at least one of them, Deanie replied. But that conversation took place before the babies began learning to fly. Until then, they had stayed safely in the box. The nest was gone, hopping from one corner to another and side to side with no danger of getting out. The Rossos didn't even have to cover the box. Then one day Candy was playing with the birds, and she perched one on the edge of the carton. To her surprise, it fluttered its wings and flopped to the floor outside the box. After that, whenever one of the birds was anywhere above ground, it tried out its wings. None of the babies had much success at first, but they were getting better, and finally the Rossos had to cover the box with a screen if they weren't going to be near the birds. As the weather grew even warmer, Faustine and Deanie began carrying the box outside after school. Then they would take the babies out one by one to play in the farmyard. Remember what Dr. Bernardi said to do next, Faustine reminded her sister. Right, the babies have to learn to find their own food. The babies had no trouble with this. They were much better than the girls at spotting insects and grubs. Just in case, though, the twins showed them where the bird feeder was. Finally, it became difficult to contain the birds in their box. They're getting to be champion flyers, said Faustine, feeling both proud and sad. And at last came the day when Mrs. Rosso announced, "It's time to set the birds free." "All of them?" asked Faustine. "Yes, all of them," replied her mother firmly. "Couldn't we keep just one?" It was breakfast time on a Saturday morning, and Faustine looked pleadingly at her brothers and sisters, who in turn looked pleadingly at both of their parents. "Kids," said Mr. Rosso, "the birds are wild things, just like the fawn was. They deserve their freedom." So that morning the bird box was carried outdoors for the last time, and one by one the babies were tossed into the air. Each flew steadily to a nearby tree. "Goodbye, birds," whispered Faustine. For a long time afterward, whenever she saw a sparrow on their property, Faustine wondered if it was one of hers. Maybe next year, she thought, Mom will change her mind and let us keep a bird. Chapter 10. Bainbridge. Bainbridge could hardly believe that summer vacation had finally arrived. He loved summertime, and he'd been looking forward to the end of school for months. But what, he wondered, would he and his brothers and sisters do on the farm for 74 days, which was exactly how long summer vacation would last. In the beginning, they had found plenty of things to do, all the things that they hadn't had enough time for while they were in school. But after 2 weeks, they'd had their fill of exploring and catching up on soap operas and playing statue outdoors in the cool gray twilight that followed supper. For the first time ever, they began to feel isolated on their farm. "I wish we could get ice cream cones somewhere," said Jan one day. "Remember in New York? We could walk right to Safari Sunday, and sometimes Mr. Softy would drive by." "I wish we could go to Bloomingdale's and shop for summer clothes," said Abby wistfully. "I wish we could go to the last roundup for those great wind-up toys," added Woody. They didn't even get to go into the little town very often because Mrs. Rosso hadn't been feeling well lately. Once Bainbridge had ridden to the town on his bicycle, but it had taken forever, and he'd sworn he wouldn't do it again. Every time Bainbridge or one of the other kids asked about a trip into town, their mother complained that the summer heat was making her too tired. She began ordering groceries over the phone and having them delivered to the farm, even though that was more expensive. And she spent most of every day lying on the couch in the living room with a cloth over her eyes. She couldn't eat a thing. "Must be the flu," said Bainbridge slowly, but he was more worried than he let on. After a week of boredom, Bainbridge became bored with being bored and decided to do something about it. His all-time favorite occupation was football, but he hadn't had much opportunity to play since he'd moved to the farm. The middle school didn't have a team, and he could rarely get enough friends together after school for a scrimmage. There was a league in town, but how many of the farm kids could get all the way into town for practice several times a week? "So I'm going to start my own team," Bainbridge told Mrs. Rosso while keeping her company in the living room one day. "Your own team?" Mrs. Rosso repeated. Her eyes were covered with a damp cloth as usual, and her face was pale. "Yeah," replied Bainbridge, "with all us farm kids out here. Getting together won't be easy, but it'll be easier than going into town. And there are a bunch of kids who'll be interested, I think. When we're organized, maybe we can play the town league sometimes. At least we can keep in shape for football tryouts at high school this fall." "That sounds good. Who would you ask to join?" Mrs. Rosso was lying very still. She said she felt seasick and that any little motion would upset her. Bainbridge was sitting on the floor across the room so as not to bother her. "Well, there are about 5 boys from my grade," he said, "and Mr. Pritchard's grandson. He's a year behind me. He lives down the road next to the Pritchards. And Dana Bernardi. He's the vet's son." Murmured Mrs. Rosso. "Bainbridge, are you eating something? I smell, I don't know, cauliflower or peanuts or something. No, Mom, honest, I'm not eating. I don't think anyone is, but I'll see if someone left food out of the kitchen. Bainbridge rushed into the kitchen. He found an open jar of peanut butter, which he capped and put away. Food smells, almost any smell for that matter, drove his mother wild these days. He returned to the living room. It was peanut butter, Mom, he announced, but I put it away. Oh, thank you, said Mrs. Rosso with a groan. Peanut butter, ugh. At that moment, Jan strolled through the living room with a gigantic, gloppy peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich. Oh, cried Mrs. Rosso, there's that awful smell again. Jan, get that out of here, exclaimed Bainbridge. But it was too late. His mother was already running for the bathroom. Bainbridge did just what he told his mother he was going to do. Early the next morning, he hopped on his 10-speed bicycle and rode to Doug Pritchard's farm. He found Doug and his father, who was old Mr. Pritchard's son, sprawled under a tractor, surrounded by tools and greasy cloths. Hey, Doug, Bainbridge called, hopping expertly off his bike. Hey, Doug replied, grinning. He wiped his hands on his jeans, which were as greasy as the cloths, and got to his feet. Dad, he said, this is Bainbridge Rosso. You know, one of the Rossos. Bainbridge was used to such introductions. Pleased to meet you, said Mr. Pritchard, sounding muffled under the tractor. I hope you'll excuse me if I don't, get up. That's okay, said Bainbridge. So what have you been doing this summer? Asked Doug. Getting bored, mostly, replied Bainbridge. There's not much to do on our farm. He gazed around at Doug Pritchard's farm, a working farm, and saw just how much needed to be done. There was machinery to be repaired, and there were animals to be fed, crops to be tended, and a house and 2 barns to be cared for. A funny feeling crept into his stomach. How was someone like Doug going to have time for football? This farm was more than a job. It was his life. Bainbridge sensed that immediately. He shifted from one foot to the other. I guess you're pretty busy all summer, he ventured, with the farm and all. Yeah, pretty busy, Doug agreed. Hey, is something wrong? No, replied Bainbridge quickly. I had an idea, but I don't think it was a very good one. Doesn't matter, though. What was the idea? Asked Doug. You gotta tell me. Don't leave me hanging. Well, said Bainbridge slowly, I wanted to start a football team out here, you know, for all us farm kids. Mr. Pritchard poked his head out from under the tractor. Now, I think that's a great idea, he said. Doug spends too much time stuck on the farm during the summer. He never sees his friends. If football practice wouldn't take up too much time, I'd be all for it. Really? Said Doug and Bainbridge at the same time. Sure. But you have to get a sponsor if you want to be a real team. Did you know that? I mean, if you want uniforms and want to play the town league from time to time. A sponsor, repeated Bainbridge. What do you mean? I mean, for instance, a business from town. How it works is, say, Zinders buys uniforms for your team and pays for expenses, and in return your team is free good publicity for them. Your team name would be the Zinders Bombers or something, and your uniforms would say Zinders on them. You'd need a coach, too, added Doug's father. Gosh, said Bainbridge, I didn't know it would be so complicated. Before you look for a sponsor, you better get a team together, though. That's true. You want to come with me, Doug? I can't, Doug replied. Not today. We have to finish with this tractor, and then I've got some work to do in the barn. Maybe tomorrow. Okay, agreed Bainbridge. I'll call you tonight and tell you how I'm doing. Bainbridge's next stop was Dana Bernardi's. He figured Dana would be an easy catch since the Bernardis lived on a farm that, like the Rossos, wasn't a working farm. Dr. Bernardi was the vet, and the Bernardis simply liked country living. However, Bainbridge noted as he walked his bicycle up the gravel driveway, the Bernardis did have some pets. He saw a horse, a German shepherd, and 2 kittens before he saw Dana himself. Dana was standing over a 10-speed bicycle that was balanced upside down by the driveway. A box of tools was open at his feet, and he was spinning the tires and checking the gears. Problems? Bainbridge called it when he was several yards away. He didn't know Dana well, and he was glad for the broken bicycle. It would give them something to talk about. Hi, Bainbridge, said Dana, looking surprised. Yeah, something's wrong with the brakes. They keep slipping. Bainbridge parked his own bike and stooped down to examine Dana's. They worked on it together for several minutes. When they stood up, their hands were black with grease, but the bicycle was working. What are you up to this summer? Asked Dana after he had thanked Bainbridge. Not much, replied Bainbridge. What are you up to? Not much, Dana grinned. I help my dad sometimes, and I do a little work around the farm, but Dana shrugged as if to say, "You know how boring things can get." Bainbridge nodded. "I wish I could get a job," Dana went on, "but my mom won't let me do that until I'm 15. "Well, I know something you can do," Bainbridge said. "That's why I'm here." He explained his idea about a farm football league. Then he told him what Doug Pritchard's father had said. "You want to help me with the team?" he finally asked. "Sure," said Dana. "That's fantastic. I think we could really do it." "I hope so," replied Bainbridge. "It isn't going to be easy." Dana and Bainbridge worked hard that day. They rode to 6 other farms to talk to kids they knew. Everyone was interested, but admitted they didn't have much time. By late in the afternoon, Bainbridge had had enough for one day, and he and Dana agreed to meet again the next morning. Bainbridge rode home, zipping along the country roads, smelling leaves and dust and honeysuckle, and watching the molten sunlight on his arms as it filtered through the trees. At home, Bainbridge found his mother feeling better. At least he assumed she was, because she was on her feet in the kitchen making dinner. There were all sorts of smelly things around her, hot dogs and mayonnaise and lemons and horseradish, and she didn't even look green. "Mom," he exclaimed, "what are you doing? Are you okay?" "I'm feeling much better, thanks," she replied. "And in celebration, I'm making us a picnic supper. We'll have hot dogs and hamburgers and potato salad, and we'll eat outdoors at the wooden table." "You're going to eat?" asked Bainbridge, amazed. "I certainly am," replied his mother. "Now could you round up some of your brothers and sisters? I need a little help here." Later, after dinner was over, Bainbridge realized that the picnic was a meal he would never forget. Not that it had been spectacular, since hot dogs and hamburgers seemed ordinary no matter what you do to them. It was what happened during the meal. The 12 Rossos had sat down to a later-than-usual dinner. They'd waited for Mr. Rosso to come home from New York, and then the barbecue had taken longer to start than anyone had expected. It always took longer than expected, but nobody ever expected that. By 7:30, though, the picnic table had been set, and a plate of hot dogs and hamburgers sat at one end. Mrs. Rosso asked the kids to seat themselves in alphabetical order, so Abby, Bainbridge, Candy, Woody, and Hardy sat opposite Faustine, Deanie, Hannah, Ira, and Jan. Mr. and Mrs. Rosso each sat at an end. For the next few minutes, food was passed back and forth, and nobody spoke except to say things like, "Jan, you've got ketchup on your elbow," or "Isn't there any horseradish?" or "Hardy, you are such a pig." That was Woody. Then Hannah spilled her milk, and in trying to mop it up, spilled Mr. Rosso's iced tea, too. At last, everyone was served and ready to eat. Bainbridge was just thinking that his mother still looked awfully tired, when suddenly she stood up. "I have an announcement to make," she said. She smiled the way you do when you feel like laughing and crying at the same time. Something emotional or very exciting must have happened, thought Bainbridge, and he grew nervous. He set his hamburger on his plate, put his hands in his lap, and waited. Up and down the benches on either side of the table, 9 other Rossos were waiting too. Mr. Rosso was grinning. "As you know," began Mrs. Rosso, "our family seems just right to me. I always wanted to have 10 children, each a year apart, and that's what your father and I did." "Except for us," chimed in Deanie. "Except for you," agreed Mrs. Rosso. "But I'd rather have twins than perfect stair-steps." The twins looked at each other and smiled. "Well," their mother went on, "although we hadn't planned it, it seems that our family is going to increase by 1 number. "A dog! A dog!" Jan shrieked. "We're getting a dog after all! Oh, I knew we would!" She jumped up and ran to her mother. "I'm glad we saved the food dish and toys and stuff," whispered Hannah, leaning across the table to Woody. "Jan, kids, I'm sorry to disappoint you," Mrs. Rosso said, disentangling Jan from her legs and aiming her toward her place at the table. "We're not getting a dog. I'm pregnant. I'm going to have another baby." Bainbridge and his brothers and sisters were slow to react. "Another baby?" Candy repeated. 11 kids, Ira said under his breath. The twins stared at each other. "Inmugle!" exclaimed Deanie. Bainbridge's mouth dropped down. Hardy's fork clattered onto the table. "No dog!" Jan cried. Then Abby jumped up, ran to the other end of the table, and hugged her mother. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful!" she exclaimed. Hardy retrieved his fork and kissed Mrs. Rosso. Suddenly all of the kids were exclaiming, "A baby! Oh, wow! And I can't believe it! And I hope it's another girl! And I hope it's another boy!" Bainbridge hugged his father. Hannah leaned across Ira and said to Jan, "Hey, Squirt, now you won't be the baby of the family anymore." Jan burst into tears. "Hannah, why did you have to say that?" asked Ira. "That was mean." He put one arm protectively across Jan's shoulders, and Jan stuck her tongue out at Hannah. who stuck her tongue out at both Jan and Ira. Suddenly Bainbridge thought of something. As the oldest boy in the family, he would ordinarily have kept quiet and discussed his idea with his parents in private. But in all the excitement, he couldn't help himself. "Hey, Mom, Dad," said Bainbridge in a tone of voice that made everyone quiet down and look at him. "You've always said we can't get a pet because 10 kids is enough. But now you guys are having another kid, so I think we ought to be able to have a dog. Or something." Mr. and Mrs. Rosso looked at each other down the length of the picnic table. Mr. Rosso raised his eyebrows questioningly, but Mrs. Rosso's only response was, "10 kids is enough." "Not fair," said Faustine flatly. "No way," agreed Hardy. "A rule is a rule," Mrs. Rosso persisted. "You broke the rule," Abby pointed out patiently. "You said 10 kids is enough, and now you're going to have 11 kids. If you get to have one more, why can't we have a pet?" "Because, and don't say because I said so," said Woody. Bainbridge shot Woody a withering look. Now was not the time to be rude, no matter how unfair their mother was being. "Young man," Mr. Rosso began warningly. "Sorry," Woody apologized quickly. "How come, Mom?" Jan asked. "Because I know who would end up feeding the pet and cleaning up after it and training it and exercising it." "We would," said Candy quietly. "But if you didn't, I'd have a new baby and a pet to care for," Mrs. Rosso pointed out. "Mom," spoke up Ira, "what if you made a rule about the pet?" Everyone looked at Ira questioningly. "What, honey?" said Mrs. Rosso. "You make lots of rules, and we follow them all, don't we?" Bainbridge suddenly understood what his little brother was trying to say. "Yeah, we always put the folded clothes on the bottom of the piles, and we sit in the van in alphabetical order." "So make up a rule about a pet," Ira went on. "Like, on even-numbered days, kids A through E take care of the pet. On odd-numbered days, kids F through J take care of it." "Hey, no way," cried Hardy. "Ira, you little sneak. There were more odd-numbered days than even-numbered ones." "See what I mean?" said Mrs. Rosso. "It's already starting." But Hardy didn't hear her. "The F through J kids would get to take care of the pet more than the rest of us would," he said crossly. There was a moment of silence. Then everyone began to laugh. "Mom," Bainbridge asked again, "our pet?" "I'll think about it," his mother replied, still smiling. "I'll help her," said Mr. Rosso. Mrs. Rosso didn't give the kids an answer until the next day. Her answer was yes. That night the 10 Rosso kids held a meeting in the boys' bedroom. "Any kind of pet we want," Hardy was saying. "So of course we'll get a dog." "Of course," agreed the others. "Where's the best pet store?" Candy wondered. "Who cares?" said Woody. "Let's decide what kind of dog to get. I want a Doberman Pinscher." "I want a Cocker Spaniel," said Abby. "I want a Beagle," said Ira, "like Snoopy." "I want a Collie," said Jan, "like Lassie." "I want a Welsh Corgi," said Candy. "I want a Golden Retriever," said Hardy. "I want a Poodle," said Deanie. "I want a Toy Poodle," said Faustine. "I want a St. Bernard," said Hannah. "I want a Great Dane," said Bainbridge. "Well, now what?" asked Woody. "Maybe," said Deanie, "instead of deciding what kind of dog to get, we should just go to the pound and see what they have." "The pound!" exclaimed Woody. "Yes," replied Deanie. "Give a home to a dog without a home." "Right," agreed Faustine. "You know," said Bainbridge, "I think that's the only thing to do. Does everyone agree?" Everyone agreed except for Woody, who had his heart set on a Doberman Pinscher. "Woody," said Bainbridge, "Mom and Dad said we could get a dog, not a monster. I don't think they'd be okay with a Doberman Pinscher anyway." Woody nodded his head in resignation. He didn't look happy. "Hey," exclaimed Abby, "let's get What Shall We Name the Baby and figure out what the new baby will be named. Oh, I hope it's not going to be something truly horrible, like Crenella." Abby found the book and brought it back to the boys' room, where her brothers and sisters were waiting nervously. "Okay," she said. "Let's see. This baby's name will begin with K. If it's a boy, he'll be..." She counted down to the 11th name on the boy's K page. "Keegan." "Not too bad," Hardy said slowly. "And if it's a girl, she'll be... Kelly." "Oh, Kelly, that's pretty," said Candy. "And normal," added Hannah. "I hope it's a girl," said Jan. "I hope it's a boy," said Woody. "You know what?" said Bainbridge. "I just realized something. I don't have to start a football team for farm kids. No matter what the baby is, in a few years, when Kelly or Keegan is walking, we'll have 11 kids. That's enough for our own football team." "Right," Abby agreed with a happy sigh. I'm glad we'll be an 11-kid family. Even if it ruins Mom's step-stairs, added Ira. Wait, said Bainbridge. Correction, not an 11-kid family. What then? Asked Woody. You don't mean more twins? Nope, replied Bainbridge. I mean an 11-kid, one-pet family. Chapter 11. Zsa Zsa or Zuriel. Abby thought it was fitting that the twins were the ones who found the Rossos' pet. They were the biggest animal lovers of all, and they were also the ones who were the most concerned about homeless animals. It happened 2 days after Mrs. Rosso had announced her surprising news, and not long before she was to drive Abby and her brothers and sisters to the pound. Faustine, Gardenia, called Mrs. Rosso. Would one of you run to the end of the driveway and get the mail, please? The twins went together, of course, talking excitedly about what kind of dog they might find at the pound. Shh, Deanie said as they neared the mailbox. Faustine stopped talking. She thought she heard a tiny squeak. Then the noise came again, more loudly. Mew! The twins looked at each other. They ran to the ditch along the side of the road. Kitty! They called. Here, Kitty! Mew! Mew! It didn't take long for the twins to find a tiny gray and white kitten huddled into a little ball near a puddle in the ditch. The kitten was wet and dirty and trembling. I'll get it, cried Deanie, sliding into the ditch. Be careful, said Faustine. Don't let it bite you. Deanie approached the kitten slowly, talking to it in whispers. You poor thing, she kept saying. It's okay. The kitten was too miserable to try to run away from Deanie. It allowed itself to be picked up and then to be handed to Faustine before Deanie scrambled out of the ditch. The twins took turns carrying it back to the farmhouse. Oh, good, you're back, said Mrs. Rosso as they opened the screen door and came into the kitchen. Let me just look at the mail and then we'll leave for the pound. Oops, said Deanie as she realized they'd forgotten the mail. Oops, said Faustine. And at that moment Mrs. Rosso saw the kitten. She gasped. We found it in the ditch, said Faustine. Someone must have abandoned it, Deanie added. Well, for heaven's sake, let's get it cleaned up. Mrs. Rosso set up an assembly line to wash, dry, feed, and cuddle the kitten. By the time the kitten's fur was clean and its tummy was full, it was purring contentedly in Abby's lap, eyes half closed. The other kids had gathered. I guess we're going to keep it, aren't we? Said Abby, glad that for once there was no question about whether they were allowed to. You want the kitten for your pet? Mrs. Rosso asked. This is it, you know. One baby, one pet. We aren't going to get a dog in addition to the kitten. The Rosso kids held a silent meeting with their eyes. The kitten wasn't the same as a beagle or a poodle, and certainly not the same as a Doberman Pinscher, but they wanted to keep it. After all, it was homeless too. What did it matter whether they gave a home to a dog from the pound or a kitten from the ditch? Besides, who could turn away the rumbly ball of fur that was dozing in Abby's lap? We want the kitten, Abby said, speaking for her brothers and sisters as well as herself. Mrs. Rosso nodded. It's settled then. Who wants to drive into town to buy a litter box and some food? Everyone did, but in the end, Hannah, Hardy, Bainbridge, Jan, and Ira went, while Abby, Candy, Woody, and the twins stayed with the kitten. They cuddled it and talked to it until it was exhausted and fell sound asleep, its front paws hanging over one side of Abby's lap and its tail hanging over the other. The kitten was wide awake by the time the others returned with 2 bags of cat supplies. As Abby watched it frisk daringly around the kitchen, she thought, You never know that just a few hours ago this kitty was lost in a muddy ditch. Now it looks as if it owns our kitchen. Come here, kitty, said Jan. You want to play with your toys? Look what we bought for you. She tossed a rubber mouse across the floor, and the kitten went skidding after it. Hey, it likes its toy, Jan exclaimed. We better decide whether the kitten is a boy or a girl, said Candy. Then we won't have to call it it. We need a name for it, too, said Hannah. Deanie picked the kitten up and examined it. I can't tell if it's a boy or a girl, she said. It's too young. We'll have to wait a couple of weeks until it's older. How are we going to name it? Asked Hardy. We have to know whether it's a boy or a girl. Bainbridge frowned. Let's go outside and think about this. It's too hot in here. Jan scooped the kitten up, and she and the rest of the kids marched through the screen door, which closed with a bang behind the last one, and out to the oak tree where Sally was buried. They sat in an untidy group. Hardy untied one of his sneakers and dangled the lace in front of the kitten, watching it batted back and forth. Abby gazed around at her brothers and sisters and thought that they didn't look a thing like the New York kids who'd moved to the country almost a year ago. Those kids had been worried about pollution and muggers and cockroaches. They hadn't known a rose from a daffodil. The kids sitting under the oak tree were relaxed, slightly dirty, except for Ira, and not worried about much at all, except maybe bee stings, or whose room the new baby would sleep in. They'd raised a nest full of birds, survived a snowstorm, and discovered a secret room in their house. It was thoughts such as those that gave Abby the courage to say, "I've got an idea about naming the kitten." "What?" asked the others. "I was just thinking that the 10 of us haven't turned out too badly. Think of everything that's happened this year. We started at new schools and made new friends and had adventures. And we did it all with names like Dagwood and Calandra. And Bainbridge," added Bainbridge. "Right," said Abby. "So maybe Mom knows what she's doing. Or maybe not. But I think we should take the kitten's name from What Shall We Name the Baby? That way we won't have to argue over the name, and Mom would be flattered if we used the book. And it would be nice to flatter her since she did finally get us a pet." The Rosso kids considered this. At last Bainbridge said importantly, "Abby, do you move that we name the kitten from What Shall We Name the Baby?" "Yes," replied Abby, "I do." "I second the motion," said Candy. "All those in favor say aye," instructed Bainbridge. "Aye," said Abby, Bainbridge, Candy, Woody, Hardy, Faustine, Deanie, Hannah, Ira, and Jan. "Those opposed?" Silence. "Go get the book," said Bainbridge. Abby retrieved the book from the house and opened it to the L pages. "Hey," said Candy, "what if Mom and Dad have another kid after Kelly or Keegan? Or what if they have twins again? We better not use up either one of the 12th L names." "That's true," Abby agreed. "But then we're really not using Mom's system." "We don't know how many kids might be in our family one day, though," Candy pointed out. "Well, we know one thing. There probably won't be 26, Hannah said. "Let's start at the back of the book and give the kitten a Z name." "The last Z name," Ira added. "Whatever it is. There probably aren't very many of them." "Okay," said Abby. "We'll look up the last boy's Z name and the last girl's Z name. When we know what the kitten is, we'll give it the right one." Abby opened the book gingerly. She was almost afraid to look. "Well," she said, "guess what? If it's a girl, Zsa Zsa." "Zsa Zsa? That's cute," exclaimed Jan. "And if it's a boy, Zuriel." "Oh, weird," muttered Hannah. "Not weirder than Eberhard," said Hardy. "What's going on out here?" The Rosso kids looked up to see their mother crossing the farmyard. "Mom, meet Zsa Zsa or Zuriel," said Abby, holding up the kitten. She explained how they had arrived at the names, and Mrs. Rosso began to look teary-eyed. "What a nice idea," she said. "Don't get too carried away," Faustine cautioned her, grinning. "If you and Dad have twins again, then we have to get a dog, too." "Oh, brother," said Mrs. Rosso, shaking her head. "Let's see. A dog," said Abby. "What would we name it?" "Second to the last Y names," Hardy replied. "And those," said Abby, thumbing through the book, "are Yvette and Yule." "Yule?" cried Hardy, choking. "You know something? I'm glad I'm named Eberhard." "And I'm glad I'm named Dagwood," said Woody. "Well, I'll tell you something," Mrs. Rosso spoke up. "I'd love all you kids no matter what you were named." "Even if we were John and Jim and Sue and Sally and not in alphabetical order?" asked Ira. "Even then." Ira sighed with contentment. His brothers and sisters turned look-alike freckled faces to Zsa Zsa or Zuriel and smiled at their first pet. 10 kids, 1 pet, and a new baby on the way. Mrs. Rosso sighed with contentment too.